research, basically. So this is, let me just step through this first. Get to the bottom. Okay. So when we are preparing to, or preparing ourselves for the potential job interview, we have to make sure that we understand exactly what the job requirements are in the job description. So whatever job position that you're, or opportunity that you're applying to, bear with me, I'm just receiving another chat here. Let me just see what's going on. Yes, Dexter, I certainly will. It's quite possible, Dexter, that you may receive that handout afterwards. I may have sent it to you afterwards because you registered late, and so that email may just be coming to you. But if it doesn't, I certainly will get onto that. Okay, so we must review the job requirements, and the reason why that's important is because that's going to structure how we formulate our research and how we strategize the actual strategize ourselves of how we are going to interface with this potential job opportunity and whoever the hiring manager or the interviewer is. So what we need to do is when we look at this job requirement from the job description, it will then identify exactly from what we're extracting all the strengths and requirements that they're expecting from the ideal candidate. Now, you've already sent your resume in, and you might not have actually received a formal interview request, but you're going to go ahead and get yourself ready for the potential interview. So you need to assess your strengths and your abilities, and as well as your potential accomplishments and your previous experience. That is essential to this position because they are going to be asking you a lot of different types of questions, and perhaps they may be very simple generic questions, or they may be somewhat difficult questions. They may be scenario questions, things like that, which are a little bit more difficult to answer. But you have to basically have a lot of ammunition together to impress the individual who is going to interview you. Now, as we mentioned before in the earlier presentation, that there are different types of interviews now that AI is on board, and we're seeing a lot of interviews, screening interviews that typically were originally the telephone interview, that's actually being conducted now by an automated service, predominantly run by AI, to screen you to make sure that you are absolutely somewhat honest and correct in how you represented yourself in your resume. So we're seeing those you know, one-sided interviews that are fully automated, that are actually initializing the software to screen you on that, running facial recognition, things like that. Okay, so you don't necessarily get an opportunity to answer all these great things about your strengths, weaknesses, or if those questions do exist, or your strengths and abilities, and whatever. This screening interview is strictly being done to assess that you are absolutely honest in your representation. Okay, so that's one type of interview we're going to talk about now. So you have to research the company and gain knowledge about it as well, because during the interview you're selling yourself, you're building this relationship, you're trying to impress the potential interviewer or the hiring manager or whoever is sitting down with you, either in a remote setting or in a person-to-person setting, physical contact or whatever, that you know a lot about the company and you're the best candidate. So it's like a little love fest, right? We're sitting down and we're getting to know each other, and if you are impressing them, then obviously they want to impress you because they'd like you to join their company. Now, additionally, if we have the opportunity to research the interviewer, to connect with them in a meaningful way, we can do so possibly before the interview. In other words, you might be able to research them on LinkedIn if you happen to know who the interviewer is going to be. Okay, many times when we reach out to individuals, staffing agencies, or recruiters to actually ask them to assist us in locating job opportunities, they will actually interview us first. In other words, they may actually do screening interviews, or they may actually prepare us in the interview process to get in front of a company and be able to do well. So in that case, if you happen to know that the staffing agency is going to interview you, or perhaps a recruiter is going to interview you, or even a hiring manager is going to interview you because you may have networked your way into this opportunity, you should do as much as possible to reach out and find out a little bit of information about them. And how can we do that? Well, if we know their name and the company they work for, we might be able to find them and read their bio on LinkedIn, or we may be able to find them and read their bio through some other search engine. Okay, so if you can get some knowledge or get some information on this individual, it means that you can somehow build a relationship. You don't necessarily have to reach out to them before the interview, but you could actually impress them with knowing a little bit about them during the interview, perhaps some small talk. Here's an example, for instance. In my past, I used to do a lot of ocean racing, big sailboats in the Atlantic. And if I were going to interview with a company that manufactures sails or marine craft, I may want to find out who's actually going to interview me. So when I get to the interview, I may know a little bit about them, so I could do some research and find out exactly, what their interests are. So when I'm in front of them, I can have somewhat of a small talk, a little chat, to try and get them to like me before we get into the interview process, right? So it's all about building relationship. It's a two-way street. So that's why we want to do some research on the interviewer and connect with them in a meaningful way. Now, when you're actually doing the interview, you're going to obviously share the fact that you've done research on a company, and you're going to share that you know about their culture, their services, their products, perhaps their competitors, or even what may be happening in the marketplace that could be detrimental to their existence. And if you can show that type of research and perhaps have a discussion on it, you might even become more valuable to the potential employer, because it shows that you've taken initiative to get to know everything about the company. And that's what they want. They want to hire people who can bring value add to the company, not just about doing the job and coming to work at 8 and leaving at 5 or whatever your schedule is, but it's how you can work with the company to help them to survive, because the future is going to be somewhat very unpredictable for many of these companies, and they're going to want people to know a lot about their companies or about future ways of keeping them in the existing marketplace. All right, so those are some certain things that you should be aware of. So let's move on to the next slide, and we can look at some of the other things that are important. So this is confirming the interview. Okay, so it says confirm the time, date, and location a day before the interview. So certainly that is in the case that you're actually driving to the interview, or you're going to be doing something in person. However, if it is a remote interview or a virtual interview, you're certainly going to confirm the date, the time, and the location, because the location obviously will be a URL or wherever you need to link into. And you don't have to do it a day before. You can do it several days before. Why is it important? Because certainly if you're going to do virtual interviews, you need to make sure that your technology is going to work, and that your existing system, whether it be your smartphone or your laptop or your desktop or your tablet, that you have the latest technology or the latest software downloaded, so it can actually run this application that you might be using to interview on. All right, so that's what we're talking about here. There's a lot of things happening in the background. So when we confirm the date, time, and location, we're not just confirming it to the person that is setting up or the company that's setting it up. We're actually confirming it to ourselves that everything is actually working. Okay, now when it says ask what type of interview and if there's anything to prepare, this is really important, because sometimes when we are working with certain agencies or companies, depending on whatever the position may be, they don't have this very personal interactive mode. Sometimes they're sending out templates, and these templates are not necessarily very full of explanation. So one concern I would have is they might ask you to attend a formal screening interview, but yet they won't identify in this potential screening interview that you will not have any time to prepare for the questions, or you will not be given any heads up as to what type of questions are going to be asked, or you will, if it's a one-way interview, you need to find out if it's going to be timed. You need to find out what the settings or the requirements are as far as possibly the technology, things like that. So many times today, or I shouldn't say many times today, but certainly in the future, we will be spending more time interviewing in an automated setting, meaning that we're not going to have a physical human on the other side. We'll be running some kind of software avatar, and everything is going to be highly automated, running by AI. So we need to make sure that we understand, or we need to make sure that we have all the information available before we do this interview to know what's expected. Now, when we interview, especially in a one-way interview or the two-way interview in a virtual mode, please be aware that they'll never tell you this, but please be aware that we are always going to be under virtual, I should say, facial recognition. And this is a software program that is being run. It has been utilized by companies for at least the last 5 years or so, probably even longer. But they are going to be running for facial recognition software on their computers. So whenever you're looking into your camera, it's actually going to be scanning your facial features to determine if there is a potential chance that you may be dishonest, or you may be having difficulty answering the questions. So it's not just about listening to your speech. It's not just listening to how long it takes you to answer the question. It's actually identifying, well, it's actually recording your voice as well, but it's actually identifying if you actually are being honest with the information that you're sharing with them. Okay, so they're looking for your they're basically looking at your eyes, they're looking at your lips, they're looking at your facial features. So this is just something that you need to be aware of, okay? And you can certainly read up on that. And is this legal? Well, a lot of people are asking this question, is it legal? No, it doesn't matter if it's legal or not. The fact is that it's happening, and you can't prove that they're running this feature, but they are using it because today's software is highly acceptable to be utilized in the interview process. And if they use facial recognition, that is almost like a human looking at you. Okay, so it doesn't matter if it's actually being utilized by software or if it's being utilized by a human. They're basically looking for some kind of honesty in how you answer certain interview questions. Okay, let's see somebody. Let's see. Okay, wow, that seems border on discriminating. Interesting. Yeah, this is from Helen. So, so here's the thing, Helen. As far as facial recognition, they're not going to identify to you that they're running facial recognition software, but it is already being utilized, and they're not going to give you the option to opt out, because let's make a suggestion here, or let me make a suggestion. If you were to attend an interview and you really wanted to get employed by a company, and they identified that they were going to run facial recognition software to determine if you're being honest, or to probably acquire some additional information as far as recording your voice and your facial features, and they give you the option to opt out. Why would you want to opt out? I mean, what is it that you'd be concerned about if they were running that? Even if you thought it was discrimination, the intent is for you to secure the job. Okay, so you should, unless you're really concerned about the ethical reasons behind it, or perhaps them selling the data, in other words, recording your information and selling the data, then perhaps that's a different scenario. But as far as recording your features to determine if you are doing well on the interview question, or if possibly you might be being dishonest, I would just make a suggestion that if you come into an interview process, are going to be honest anyway, and you're going to do your best. So, however they use the software, my opinion is, um, if you want to, get back into the workforce, you may have to play along with whatever the employer is going to be using. Unknown to a lot of us, when interviewing started and it was a remote interview, through, remote features such as camera, whatever. This was going back probably 7 years ago or so. There were many Fortune 500 companies that were using facial recognition, and they never told their individuals about it. A lot of this was on Wall Street, companies running, doing hiring in Wall Street and things like that, or high-tech companies. And no one really knew about it until somebody got a hold of this information and started talking about it, and it was a big uproar. Okay, so the question is, yes, Donna, can you ask them if they'll be using facial recognition? If you ask them, they'll say no, because it would obviously open up, a further discussion point. I'm only suggesting to you that you should basically approach the interview, and believe that everything, because it's all AI driven now, that if there's a good chance that they're running facial recognition, they are going to be running facial recognition. So I don't think that we should necessarily be concerned about it, because when we are actually interviewing, and I know I'm digressing here, when we're actually interviewing, we are being honest. We're doing the best we can. We want to get back into the workforce. And if we can just bypass this hurdle and not be overly worried about it, then it should be okay. But once we start kind of limiting ourselves because we're worried about, ethical concerns and things like that, then we're going to start, holding ourselves back, because really, we have no control of what personal information that belongs to us is up there in the cloud. Many companies are being hacked. Nobody knows about it. We won't know until there's some kind of mass lawsuit or something like that. So it's quite possible that a lot of our data is already out there, and we're just not aware of it. And that's unfortunately the way it is. So anyway, I think we'll probably need to move on. Otherwise, I could get lost in this discussion point very, very quickly. Yeah. Yeah, so Helen, you can go ahead and do the research. There's not a lot of information willingly being shared on this right now, only because nobody's coming forth. But the only thing I can say is, with the advent of AI, and obviously, what we are already using AI to do a lot of our work, that if you should go ahead and query, let's say that, here's an example. If you should use your ChatGPT right now, and you should query and say, um, how is the employer utilizing AI to verify that individuals are being honest on their resumes or during their interviews? AI might come back and suggest that there is facial recognition software being run. Okay, so that's something you could think about doing, or you could go ahead and just do the research. But my suggestion is, um, be be aware that with artificial intelligence, there is companies that will be using this um, option, and they will not be telling you that they're running facial recognition. Okay, so let's see. So the other bullet that we need to talk about is, okay, ask for parking instructions before you access the building. So this is a very old slide, obviously, but yes, if you're going to drive to a location, you need to at least try and get there a couple days in advance to look at the traffic flow and to look at the layout to make sure that you don't get held up because you took the wrong turn and you're in some kind of construction zone. Um, but as far as getting access to the building, if you need to be physically there, I would just make sure that you don't leave that to the last minute and be late for the interview. Okay. Now, as far as the interviewers, make sure, obviously, this is for the interview thank you letter. Um, make sure that you understand how to spell their names correctly and their email address. That's something that you can do ahead of schedule, because you could identify that you'd like to write them a thank you letter or possibly reach out to them and follow up after the interview. Sometimes companies don't want to give you that information, especially if it's um, especially if it's actually being generated by someone else other than the interviewer. But I'm sure if you pressure the person who is communicating with you that you'd like to write a thank you letter, and you like to make sure that you spell their names correctly, they'll do everything possible to make sure that does work out for you. Okay. So drive to the interview location a day before the interview. Yes, well, that's if you actually are going to go in person, so that you have to make sure that you don't have an issue with getting there. All right, so let's move forward. Appearance. So, most important, I'm just going to step through this here. Okay, first impressions count. That's the most important thing. So, obviously, your appearance. And if we're doing virtual interview, because that seems to be the norm going forward, and this is an in-person interview, a one-sided, a one-way interview, which is fully automated, but you're still using the camera, or this is an in-person interview or a virtual interview between two people, you're still going to be dressed professionally. For the virtual interview, I would highly suggest that even though you're looking at, typically headshots, shoulder shots and above, that's where the camera is focusing on, that you don't just basically, wear your top, your professional top, and forget about the bottom, because we never know if they may ask you to stand up and introduce yourself formally, which would be quite embarrassing if you were, dressed just with the upper half and not professionally dressed in the lower half, or perhaps you were dressed professionally, but you were not wearing your shoes or something like that. Okay, so as a safety caution, I would say that even when you're doing your virtual interview, two-way or one-way, the camera is being used, that you'll be dressed professionally, because we don't want anything to happen during that situation that could kick us out of the running, okay? Such as improper dress code or something like that. So obviously, um, first impressions count, and your ability to look good by how you dress is important. Now, another question that could be asked is, well, how do we dress? Do we dress to reference the culture of the company? Um, do we dress to reference their colors? For instance, we might be thinking of, say, UPS maybe brown. That is, there happen to be their color, or they use a lot of brown in their logos and things like that, so that might be their color. Or do we, if we're going to go with FedEx or DHL, do we go with purple or something like that? Or if it's IBM, which is predominantly blue, do we go with IBM? Or if we are going to a nursing profession or a medical profession, do we predominantly do white, hygiene colors, things like that? I would say that we should do our research and look at the company culture and possibly their dress code, probably look at some pictures, or even, take a drive there and see how they dress and try to mimic their culture. All right, we still have to dress professionally, but if we can somehow mirror their culture, then it might send a signal to the interviewer who might be a good interviewer, that we've done our research and we are trying to fit in. Similar to, like, for instance, if an individual is interviewing for a nursing position, they might actually go to work in scrubs, or if an individual is doing construction project management, they may actually go to work in construction gear. Okay, they might not choose to go in a three-piece suit. They might actually choose to go to the interview in a professional formal dress code, but might be wearing certain type of boots or something like that. Who knows? Just something to think about. Now, on this slide in the yellow section, it says consider the following. So we've already spoken about the clothes, but I want to talk about the car, because I wondered when I actually read this slide a couple of weeks ago, why do they put the car in? So here's the reason, and I figured this out because I did a little bit of research. We're talking about first impressions. So if you're physically going to an interview and you have a car that is not necessarily in good working order or doesn't look presentable, the exterior may have some problems, or it may not be in good running order, but you're highly professional, highly talented, beautiful, charismatic, you look great, however you dress. I would suggest that you take an Uber or a Lyft or some other taxi service to that formal in-person interview, and do not drive your car to that location, because regardless of how you look, stepping out of a car that may have some exterior problems or may have some problems running might not fit the mission profile of that company, and they might stereotype you, um, you know, in a different setting. Okay, so my suggestion is to be aware of that, and to make sure that, remember, when we're going to an interview, um, even if we have a very nice car, we want to make sure that exterior wise it looks glamorous as we are who are driving the car. All right, and I think that's the reason why they included this in the actual presentation slide. All right, so on the bottom it says use the company standard attire, formal, business casual, or business casual. Yes, so that's all based on research of the company. Okay, so let's move forward and talk about preparing your responses. So I'm going to step through this to get to the bottom for a minute and see what it is talking about. Okay, so preparing your responses. So what this means is how to prepare to get yourself ready for the potential interview. All right, so we spoke about in many other presentations about using AI to actually assist us with interview questions and potential answers, and actually doing mock interviews, and we should definitely do that. Okay, so in this case, the first bullet that says search for common job interview questions, that's for the job description or the company that we're getting ready to interview with. Okay, and write out your possible responses. Yes, you can do that, and I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't, but we should utilize or leverage the existing tools that are available to us, either AI or Google search or even Google AI, to actually research these job interview questions based on the job description or the company. Now, one of the nice things about using AI, and I did this the other day with a client, is they had received a job opportunity interview, and the question was, well, what kind of interview questions are going to be asked? So we went ahead and used Google search, and we came up with possible scenarios based on different forums and different people that had chimed in, looking at some responses as to, or even LinkedIn actually, as to what type of interview questions they would be asking. But I suggested that we actually leverage AI to find out. So we open up the AI tool, and we suggested that we wanted to find out what type of interview questions that the company would be asking. So of course AI asked us to load the job description, and it went ahead and found the company, and it did some research, and then it identified that they had an entire suite of potential interview questions um, that could be asked for this this specific job opportunity. But then at the same time, AI then asked us to load our resume. And I was wondering, well, why would it ask us to load the resume? We just want the interview questions so we can get an idea. But what it was doing is it understood, obviously, just like an interviewer will, that you're going to ask a certain type of interview question based on the client and the applicant who is coming in for the interview. So what AI was actually doing was to try and understand who who I am asking these questions for assistance, and what is my resume all about. So once we loaded the resume, then it was able to narrow down and identify exactly what type of interview questions would be asked, and of course it also identified it could give us a sample interview answer that we should consider. Okay, so when this slide tells us to search for the common interview questions and write out the possible responses, you should leverage all available resources and tools to do that for you. Otherwise, you'll be forever sitting down and spending a lot of time doing this on your own, doing your own research, and it's going to take up a lot of your time, and it won't be as productive as if you used a tool to help you. All right. Now, of course, when you are preparing your responses for the job interview, the most important thing is that you have to convince them that you are the best candidate. In other words, we don't know who the other candidates are that are going to be interviewing for this job opportunity. We don't know who our competitors are, but we have to make sure that we convince the employer that we believe we're the best. Okay, so there has to be a lot of passion that is delivered by you to the potential employer or interviewer that identifies your belief in yourself, your self-esteem, your passion, your abilities, and basically to try and convince them that you believe in yourself and you can make it happen. Okay, and that's what a lot of employers are looking for, because they're trying to get to know you. It's not just about referencing your resume and asking you basic questions. They're trying to find out if you're going to fit in with the company, with the department, with the team that you'll obviously be working with. Okay, that's if these are the hiring managers, obviously. If it's a recruiter that's interviewing you and not necessarily making the final decision, they are going to ask you different types of interview questions. Okay. So they're going to obviously try and prepare you to win that opportunity, but it's the hiring manager that you should be most concerned about as to why you should convince them that you're the best candidate. So part of doing that is to prepare your success stories. And what are the success stories? Well, the success stories are really the accomplishments of what you've had in your past experience working at other companies, and how you can leverage that and bring it forward into this new engagement that you're interviewing for. All right. So you need to, part of your response in preparing your responses. So this is a big portfolio that you're creating, not just answering interview questions, but you have to obviously get ready to answer, uh, you know, or sell your success stories or your accomplishments to impress upon the interviewer that you are value add. Okay, that this is somebody that can bring success to the company, that you are basically not just the best candidate on the resume, but you have more other traits that you can bring to the company that might actually help leverage you for a different position within the company. So when we actually go through the interview process, sometimes we may actually be given a group interview, um, or what we call not so much a group interview, but a panel interview, where we may be interviewed by several people sitting, on your video, um, your interview videos chat site, or your interview in person, or however you are doing your interviewing, virtual or in person, that are questioning you and asking you different questions, because they all believe, and they may actually come from different departments, they all believe that you have the credentials and the skills and the abilities that could assist them in their department. Okay, so you don't know if that's going to happen, so you need to come forward into this potential opportunity with a lot of success stories or accomplishments so that you can manipulate yourself or manipulate them, obviously, when you are doing your interview to try and sell yourself and win the opportunity. If you happen to be a salesperson, this is very simple because salespeople have that talent already of, basically either selling product or services, and selling themselves becomes somewhat natural. But if you are not in that type of industry or you don't have that ability to be a good salesperson, you're going to have to practice. And this requires a lot of time. And how would we do this? Well, we could leverage our friends and significant other and people that we believe could help critique us and improve us to do a better job of selling ourselves. Or once again, I'm going to throw this out, we could leverage artificial intelligence, okay, and go into like a mock interview scenario where you can communicate with AI, um, obviously through audio, not through the keyboard, and ask it to prepare you to do well in selling yourself for these interviews. And that's the beauty of artificial intelligence right now. And there are many people that are doing this, and you should start doing it, because if you don't do it, you may not compete as well as some of the other people who might not even be as good as you to actually get that opportunity. All right. Now, you also have to be prepared to interview on short notice. And this is what I was mentioning in another presentation, that when we are looking at a job opportunity and we create the interview, um, when we create the resume and cover letter, before we send it out, we need to actually be ready to interview on short notice, because you might send this out and within an hour they may contact you and ask you to do a formal interview with them, probably because they're rushed and or they believe that you're the best thing that came across their table and they're desperate to get you. So you don't want to ever send your documentation out or your application without first going through the basic potential interview questions and answers and being absolutely ready to interview on short notice, right? So that's really important. Sometimes we make that mistake, and we don't want to ever have that happen to us, because we only get one chance to make a good impression, right? Before they move on to someone else, right? So where it says rehearse your responses with your family and friends, that's the mock interview, and you can do it with your significant other, your family and friends, people that you trust, that can absolutely spend time with you, that will be honest in however you answer these questions. Um, so you're only going to utilize individuals that can understand what you're asking them to do. So if you're going to be doing mock interviews with your friends or your family members, they have to understand what the interview process is all about and how to critique you and how to listen to your answers and how to of course understand the question that's being asked as well, because if they don't understand why they should be asking you this question, then they're not going to understand what to listen to when you give them the answer. Okay, and of course they're also going to be looking at body language and mannerisms and things like that. Now, one way you can do this, if you don't want to use AI to do mock interview, or you don't want to use your family member or your friends, is that you can always record yourself on the smartphone, so you can play being the interviewer as well as the interviewee. So the intent is to basically ask yourself the question, record yourself, play it back, and decide how you can improve yourself. All right, and that actually works quite well. You just have to be honest with yourself and do the best that you can. Okay, so when we are interviewing, the last bullet says practice maintaining a conversational flow. Worst thing that we can do is to talk too much. All right, so that happens to be me. I love to keep talking, and sometimes I trap myself in whatever I'm saying. Of course, I'm not talking about interviewing. I'm just talking about, just talking talking generally, okay? I really want to make my point, um, and I tend to speak too long, and then I'm off on some kind of tangent, and it has nothing to do with the original intent of me speaking or what I'm trying to accomplish, and then I get myself trapped in something silly. Okay, so you have to make sure that when you're doing your interviewing that you practice maintaining a conversational flow as it relates to what the interview question is or as it relates to what you're trying to accomplish. Okay, let's move forward and talk about interview tips. Okay, so we're going to step through this. And a lot of this we've already kind of touched on. I'm just going to go all the way down to the bottom. Oops, sorry. Okay, so we spoke about know about the job that you're interviewing for. Okay, so it's important that you understand the job description and what you're trying to accomplish. And then, of course, you will practice your success stories. We talked about that, your accomplishments, and why it's important. Obviously, your self introduction, or this could be your sales pitch. So you have to memorize your self introduction, or what we call a sales pitch. Now, the sales pitch or the self introduction is going to be different for each job that you interview for, because that self introduction is all about your skills, your abilities, your accomplishments, and all the great things about you as it relates to the job description. So your self introduction for, say, an office administration position is going to be completely different from your self introduction for an accounting position. All right, if you happen to be very versatile in both of those job descriptions. Okay, so the self introduction consists of a lot of keywords, your skills, your abilities, and everything as it relates to the actual interview or the job description that you're introducing yourself to. That has to be memorized before you go to that opportunity, and it needs to flow. In other words, you have to practice to make sure it flows when you deliver that. All right. Um, the last thing you want to happen to you, which actually happened to me many years ago when I was much younger, is to have a brain freeze and we're just kind of stuck looking silly like a deer in headlights. Okay, that's because I didn't spend a lot of time practicing. I just thought I could memorize it, and it eventually caught up to me. Okay, now when we're actually interviewing, we will never initiate any kind of salary discussion until we are at the final running where we are absolutely sure we're going to get some kind of offer. And the reason why that's important is that you don't want to, you know, have us negotiate yourself or initiate any salary discussion and kick you out of the final running, because that's a very delicate discussion that can actually put a red line right through your potential moving forward. And I would suggest that not many people, but a lot of people tend to bring in benefits and salary and vacation and all of these things too early in the interview phase. We want to impress upon the interviewer that we're there to help the company be successful, to make them grow, to improve their bottom line. And we're not so much worried, even though we don't want them to believe that we're necessarily worried about benefits, vacation, working conditions, salary, and things like that. We want them to get to like us so that we can continue the interview flow and the different interview um, opportunities, maybe anywhere from one, two, or three, or even four different interview schedules to get to the final offer. Okay, so I think that the salary discussion should be reserved for when we're getting close to that potential offer. So do not discuss that early. And when it says be prepared to negotiate, if you are early in the running in an interview and someone says, or the potential interviewer says, so what are your salary requirements? I would suggest that you would always say negotiable. All right. And if they keep pressing you and they want a hard number, then you should have done your research and you should have understood, um, possibly what this company pays. You might not actually have seen it in the job description or the job, opportunity, but perhaps by doing your research, you may be able to find out that the salary has a range for this company in a certain geographical area. So don't go through don't, do your research and say, well, national standard or national average is, because that's not going to pertain to Florida. Or, perhaps if you're in California, California would be a higher salary, obviously. So it's all going to be based on the company and the geographical location. So if you are forced to actually identify something, then know the range and go right into the middle and just, stay into the middle. You don't want to go to the bottom. You don't want to go to the top, because that could be used against you. Okay. Now, interview tips. It says, be at least 10 minutes early. I suggest that you get to the interview an hour early or even more. And some people might say, well, why is that? Because you might be asked to fill out a lot of documentation, which requires you to sit down and physically write the information in. And you don't want to be caught having to complete this information when the interviewer steps out and says, okay, let's get this interview started, because now you're going to walk into that interview with a whole bunch of incompleted documentation. And that is why you want to get to the interview way ahead of schedule. All right, that's if you're going there in person. Okay, now someone is mentioning something. Give me 1 sec. Let me just open up the chat. Let's see. Yes, absolutely, Helen. You're absolutely right. So Helen said, I'd like to go early so I can see the people and the culture. Absolutely correct. That's so important. But here's the other reason too. Let's say that you're traveling to the interview and something happens to your dress or your jacket or whatever you're wearing. Probably coffee spills on it, or probably you stepped out of the car and somebody drove by and splashed you, and unfortunately it's ruined your appearance. So you could get to the company early or the location and do the best you can to tidy up yourself, or you can get to the company early to go through your meditation if you need to meditate, or to go ahead and review and to psych yourself out for the potential interview. If we are getting to the interview 10 minutes early and we are as sharp as a fiddle and we can do it, then that is impressive and very good that you can do that. But most of us tend to be a little nervous or full of anxiety, so we need time to basically get ourselves prepared, and that's why it's important. You don't have to physically walk into the waiting, into the lobby necessarily way in advance, but you need to at least get there and make sure that you're completely prepared before you actually walk into that lobby and introduce yourself to whoever may be at the front desk. That's if you're going in person. Now, if you are attending a virtual interview, and that will have to be the future more or less, you should still arrive, I would say 15 minutes early to that formal virtual interview process. Now, once you log in, you'll be in basically a virtual waiting room. But please remember that if you're in front of that camera and they're running and they're recording now, so basically they're recording everything, so we don't know, that camera is pointing at us, so that means that on their side, if you've actually been allowed to enter into their wait room, they could very well be recording everything that they see on the camera. That means that when you're in front of your camera, you need to be absolutely professional. So if you've logged in early and you're in their virtual wait room and they've accepted you, please be very careful about what you're doing in front of that camera. In other words, you should be absolutely looking at the camera, and if you choose to do anything else, you should take yourself off of video by closing down that video connection and do whatever you need to do. Perhaps take a sip of water or something like that, but do not drink any water or take or chew gum or bite a piece of candy or something like that while that camera is actually looking at you. while you're waiting in that virtual waiting room, okay? Because you don't know if they're actually recording all of that information. All right. Now, obviously, put your phone on silent, not vibrate. Yes, that's obviously important. You don't want that to happen when you're actually doing the interview process and having this thing continually go off and off and off, and then you have to either find it in your purse or you have to find it in your jacket or something like that. That's very distracting. Okay, so that's what they're talking about. So here's some additional tips. Just going to scroll all the way down here. Okay. So, smile, be likable, and be authentic. Okay, we talked about that. All right. That's so important. All right. You must be smiling, you must be loving, and you must be likable, and you must be authentic. In other words, because we're building the relationship. Okay. Well, loving is definitely not part of it, but I would say that you should be a lovable person. Okay. Now, make eye contact. That's so important. So we're either doing this in person or we're doing this through the camera. Watch your body language. So when we're interviewing, typically the camera is going to be focused on our upper body. But if you're in person, the body language is really important because sometimes we may be wringing our fingers or we may be, perhaps doing something with our hands. Or sometimes we may be doing something with our legs. We may have a nervous, something going on. We might be shifting around in our chair if it's a swivel chair or something like that. So be aware of your body language, okay? Especially your facial features. That's really important, all right? So keep your answers concise and focused. Don't do like what I typically love to do, which is keep running on with my expression of my answer and get myself trapped. Basically, you want to control the interview as much as they want to control it. So you want to try and get to the end of their interview questions, so you can start asking your questions. All right. If they don't give you the opportunity to ask your questions during the interview, you want to get to the end of the interview so you can start asking your questions. Because remember, you don't necessarily have to take this job. You want to make sure that this job is going to be the best thing that ever happened for you. And many times we go into these interviews and we are what we call bait and switched into a different type of opportunity. So the opportunity looks good on paper when we either find it or we research it or we're told about it, only to go to the interview to find out that, well, whatever they told us in the job description or job opportunity is not necessarily what they're going to be asking us to do. Okay, so that's where you'd be asking your questions to make sure that you're in sync with whatever they intend you to be doing when you come on board. Okay, so ask for clarification if needed. Yes, you're allowed to do that during the interview process. You're absolutely allowed to ask for clarification if you don't necessarily understand the question. And actually, asking for clarification is really a good thing too, because you can gain some extra time to get yourself ready to actually do the potential answer. If you needed to somehow, get the gears turning in your mind, because you couldn't remember exactly what you wanted to say for that type of question. So you can ask for clarification so that you can give yourself a little bit more time to answer the question properly. All right. Now, when you're doing the interview and it says, um, you can show off your Prove It book. This is basically your portfolio. This is what they're talking about. And that portfolio, not only does it consist of your resume, your cover letter, but it could consist of your references and all your letters of accomplishment or your letters of recommendation and things like that. So you should bring to the interview, if it's an in-person interview, a portfolio which has additional information that can help sell you. Perhaps it could even be your diplomas or your certifications or anything that is related to the job. In other words, it has to be related to the job. So if I am interviewing for an IT position and I also have a culinary arts certification, I would not necessarily be displaying my culinary arts certification or degree in my portfolio, because it has no bearing for my IT position that I'm interviewing for. Okay, well, unless I'll be doing culinary arts in an IT industry. However, basically, you understand what I'm saying. Okay, so your portfolio basically consists of documents as it relates to the job description you're interviewing for, and remember to be honest. As I mentioned before, if they're running facial recognition software is quite sophisticated. It can actually pick up certain things, visual indications. But you want to be honest in your answers, because if they think that you're not being honest, they're going to start trapping you in either not only in potentially in that question where they think you're not honest, but future questions. So they may be asking you to, perhaps more scenario-based questions like what would you do if, or tell me about a time when, or things like that. Okay, so you always want to come across as being honest as much as possible. Okay, so types of interviews. So we have these different types of interviews. We have the telephone, the one-way, the two-way, the AI interview, the text, the interview audition, and the face-to-face. So let's quickly get through this here. Okay, I'm just going to step through this to show, oops, what did I do? Okay, step through this to get to the bottom here. Okay, so the telephone interview. So this is typically a screening call. So it can be used as a screening call because they got your information, or either through your networking, or they got your information because you applied. But they're going to basically do a first telephone interview screening call to find out if you're still interested in the opportunity before they move forward with the entire process. The telephone interview might come to your doorstep unannounced, meaning that you have sent out all these job applications, okay, and you're presently communicating through email and setting up different types of interviews, and a lot of them may be virtual. And because you're in the market for potential job opportunities, you're going to be answering almost every call that's coming in. Unfortunately, there will be a lot more calls coming in, and as you start to answer calls, because you want to make sure this is not a potential hiring manager or a recruiter, obviously all the scams are going to be picking up on that, and you'll be overwhelmed with a lot of calls. But it has to be done, okay? So you cannot block in any area codes. So always anticipate a telephone interview, or a telephone call. Now, if someone calls and you pick up the phone, this could be actually an interview. So you always have to make sure that you are professional when you answer the phone. And because you are marketing yourself and selling yourself, you're in a career transition mode. You're anticipating an interview that's not necessarily scheduled. So you get a telephone call and you introduce yourself. Hello, this is Michael Nation. How can I help you? With the best of your voice, okay? And they might then say, well, this is such and such, and I'm just following up because we got your information on LinkedIn, or I got sent your resume, and I'd like to ask you a couple questions. Okay, this is an interview. Even though they have not identified that this is an interview, you are in the formal interview process. So you must put your interview cap on and remember that everything in your environment now goes quiet. So the dog, the cat, the parrot, the children, the TV, the music, everything must be turned off, and everybody must exit the area so that you can have a very quiet interview or a quiet discussion with this person. One of my suggestions is that if you happen to be in a home environment when this happens and you have a lot of family members around, I would suggest that you immediately say, well, thank you very much for your call. Is it possible to call you back Or is it possible for you to give me a couple minutes so that I may go into a quiet environment? Okay? Now, you don't have to say that because you have children in the background or you have dogs barking. You just want to let them know that you'd like to prepare yourself. So do not accept this telephone call when you are in an environment that is extremely noisy, because that is going to stereotype you, not necessarily as being unprofessional, but that would basically allow them to characterize what type of environment you're living in. Okay? Now, when you receive this call, you're obviously going to go to a quiet place to take the call. If you don't have a quiet room, then I would suggest that you always anticipate receiving a call like this. You can go into your closet, you can go into a bathroom, you can go somewhere that basically whatever noise that may be existing in your home environment doesn't actually bleed in to this room where you're taking the call. Okay? Obviously, you will be removing all distractions, which is asking everyone to be quiet or to turn down the volume of anything that's happening or put the pets in another room or something like that. So you are going to be listening carefully, and you're going to make sure that you get as much information from this potential person, especially their name and how to spell it and their email address, because you're going to want to communicate back to them. You've already got their telephone number, but you want to communicate back to them through email, because this is your way of recording and documenting this kind of conversation. Okay? So you'd ask them for that information, and you would explain why that's important. All right. So you'll ask for their contact information, obviously the spelling of their names, and you'll be taking notes. Okay. So this is typically what you'd be doing in the telephone interview. All right. When you definitely receive it. All right. So you have to be on your game, and you can't allow anything to destroy your credibility. Oops. During this phase. So obviously, you know that this is going to be an interview, even though they don't say it's an interview. So you're speaking and enunciating yourself very clearly. You're being very, very good at making sure that you maintain a very good, steady dialogue pace. Um, you'll have to make sure you do active listening, so you're not going to interrupt the interviewer when they're speaking. And of course, at the end of the interview, um, or this screening call, you're going to reiterate your interest in whatever opportunity that they have just spoke about. Okay? And then you're going to be asking, before they shut down this connection, what are the next steps? So it could have been a screening call, or it could have been a call where they would identify that this is a formal interview process. Whatever happens, or whatever mode that they're in, you will ask what are the next steps. And the next steps could be a second round of interviews, or a potential offer to come in for an interview, or a potential offer to travel to a location. Hopefully it would be all expenses paid or whatever. If they're flying us out to another location to do a formal interview at their corporate facility, or anything like that. But we need to ask what the next step is. We don't just hang up and walk away, because that means that we don't know how to prepare ourselves. Okay? And then you're going to send a thank you note, not within 24 hours, within 2 hours. Right? They have all these mistakes on these slides that need to be corrected. Okay, you'll be sending a thank you note within 2 hours, and you'll be basically identifying in that thank you note how you are going to follow up, reaching out to them so that you can possibly schedule another interview. Okay, so in the thank you note, and that's a different presentation, you'll identify that you are very happy to have received their call, that you feel that you're well aligned with this opportunity that they're offering you, that you would like to continue meeting with them or communicating with them for another round of an interview opportunity, because you have researched their company and you're passionate about working for them. So you're doing everything you can to sell yourself to this opportunity. Okay, so let's talk about the one-way video interview, and this is the one that kind of opened up the discussion about facial recognition. So let me scroll down to, okay, good. Okay, one-way video interview, usually a time limit for responses. So this is where they email you and suggest that we'd like to have you conduct an automated interview with you. So usually the structure is that they'd send you an email that hopefully would identify all the requirements for this interview method. They would identify that you need to click into a certain link. They would identify that hopefully in this email that it would be timed. They would possibly identify that the questions are limited, that the questions are structured around either possibly your resume or your application or generic interview questions or things like that. And they would also possibly identify, and they should identify, that the interview is being recorded. Now, as far as facial recognition, they're not going to identify that they will be using facial recognition. But as we mentioned before, and we got off on a big tangent, I certainly got off on a tangent. I don't think that they would be identifying that in the email. All right, probably in the future they might. So it's important to read the instructions, and if they give you the opportunity to complete the practice questions, then take advantage of that. Now, please remember that it is all about eye contact and body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, okay? Because the camera, when we're doing the one-way video interview, remember it's fully automated, so we're using a camera, and they'll be looking at our headshot, which is from our top of the shoulders and above. So please remember that when we're setting up this camera or this device to actually do this interview through our laptop, please do not use your smartphone. There is no way that the smartphone is going to do justice for you to record you on this type of one-way video interview. Mainly for the reason that if you cannot put the smartphone and lock it in place, excuse me, and you're going to think about holding it, the smartphone is all over the place because your hand is always going to be moving, okay? And you need to make sure that if you are going to use the smartphone, give me 1 second, I'm just going to clear my throat here. If you're going to be using your smartphone, it needs to be stable. It cannot be moving. But the smartphone camera has to be in at the same level as your eyes. So it cannot be on a table looking up. We don't want any nasal shots, okay? That is very, very demeaning to us. So the camera of the smartphone must be at the same level as our eyes, or it must be slightly higher looking down, okay? Which means that you're going to have to either somehow stabilize that smartphone on some type of shelf or some kind of book or something like that, so it will never move, okay? And you're going to have to make sure that you are absolutely still while it is recording you, okay? So remember, it's all about eye contact, body language, facial expression, and tone of voice when this is actually interviewing you in this one-way video interview. All right, so let's move forward and talk about the next slide. Two-way video interviews. Okay, so two-way interviews typically is between you and another person. However, the future is, believe it or not, in two-way video interviews, technology's there, so there's a good chance that there might not be a human on the other side. Because we know that avatars and AI is actually pretty sophisticated today, and I would say that within another year we'll probably always be interviewed by some kind of AI avatar or automated system. There might not be a need for a human to actually be there until you do the person-to-person interview. So it's a live interaction with a hiring manager or recruiter through a web conferencing tool, and we're typically using, most of the time, WebEx or Zoom or Microsoft Teams. A bunch of other things are there too, and it's not just these. But typically, I would say it's going to be WebEx, Zoom, and Microsoft Teams. So you have to make sure that whatever device you're using can actually run the software. So if you have an old laptop or an old desktop, or you have to go to the library to use their technology, or to somewhere else such as Career Source Sprout, because we have a lot of computers here. You have to make sure that if you're going to interview using this type of application, that the systems that you're using will actually support it, because they may want a certain type of software um, um, before they actually connect with you. They might want a certain type of software revision loaded in the computer, or or possibly your smartphone. Your smartphone should be always be updated with the latest software anyway, because they're always pushing that to make sure it covers all the security issues. So smartphones are probably always going to be okay, but certainly laptops, desktops, or tablets might have a problem because they're not running the latest software, right? So that could be a problem. So typically this is going to be the second or third conversation, or it might be the fourth, okay? In the future, predominantly, I would say video interviews are going to replace in-person interviews, okay? So obviously it's a cost-effective and convenient alternative to traditional interviews, because you don't have to travel there, and they don't have to utilize a lot of space to set up your interview process, okay? Now remember that when we're using, I'm just going to step through to the bottom here. Okay. When we're using our technology, as we mentioned before, make sure it's fully charged and that can be held steady during the interview. Notice that in this image on the slide, it shows a lady. I think that's a lady sitting down in a microphone and looking down into the computer, and obviously the camera is looking up. So that's not a very good image to use on the slide. Basically, remember the camera needs to be at your eye level, and obviously you would not be using a microphone. That's just it's just an image to kind of show the kind of technology we're using. But in any case, you need to be familiar with your camera and your audio device. So obviously you can do your mock interviews on it, and there are many ways that if they're going to utilize you using a certain app to interface with them to do interviews, there is a demo site on most of these apps that you can log into to make sure that your device is acceptable and everything is fine, okay? So you'll be double checking your settings. Obviously you're going to position the camera slightly above you so it's looking down or at eye level. You're obviously going to make sure you know everything about this potential interview opportunity. So if you have any technology issues, you can reach out to them and reschedule, especially if you lose the connection. And then of course we spoke about, the software in advance. Make sure your internet connection is strong. So in the case where we are going to interview with a potential company, and we are not doing it inside our um, living environment, and we're outside, possibly doing it through the car or somewhere else, please remember, as I mentioned, the background is so important, okay? You need to make sure whenever that camera is looking at you, that you have a plain background and nothing is happening in the background, okay? So if you're in your car, that is no problem, because the reason why this becomes important is that you need a plain background behind you, which is a neutral color such as off-white or white, so that the camera can actually focus on you and actually have a good representation of your facial features, especially if they're running an AI facial recognition software. We don't want the camera necessarily focusing on you and whatever is happening in the background, because that could easily disrupt if it is running facial recognition, okay? So we have a plain background behind us. If you don't have to have a plain background in your home setting, then you hang up a sheet, all right? So you find a way to have that sheet or something that is a white or an off color behind you, so that you have a neutral color behind, so it will help the camera to focus on you, okay? That's really, really so important. And you can all go ahead and look that up on Google if you want, just to make sure how to set up your environment for video interviewing, okay, with the cameras. And remember too that the camera, you might be using a laptop um, with an older laptop with a camera that might not necessarily be as efficient as if you're using your cell phone. Typically, cell phones or smartphones, their cameras are very sophisticated, and they're much more superior to whatever comes typically in a laptop or a desktop, mainly because the technology it's all about the technology. Okay, so I don't know if you can verify which is best, but I would suggest that if you could stabilize your smartphone, um, because you don't have a good or latest laptop or desktop with a camera system, um, then I might think about using the smartphone if you can stabilize it. Okay, so setting up your environment, we spoke about this already. A quiet location to minimize distractions, plain background that we spoke about. Obviously, you're not going to have the camera pointing at the open window with the light coming in. We have to be mindful of the lighting. So the light source should be in front of you, not behind you. We don't want that light shining at the camera. Um, and obviously, if we're wearing glasses and the light is in front of us, especially if we're using a desk lamp or something, be careful that the light could be reflecting off the glass as well, your glasses, and it could create some kind of distortion. But if you can use natural light, then that is best. The best type of source that you could use. Okay, so let's move forward and talk about AI interview. We already spoke about this. So these interviews are recorded and conducted by robots. So typically artificial intelligence interviews, this could be the one-way interview that I spoke about. And typically this is what they're actually screening. Okay, so they're screening your answers to the questions because they're running the software to record your answers, and they're actually also running and identifying how you answer, and they're um, basically chopping up your answers and making decisions based on whatever software algorithm they're using to determine if you're very good or you're having some issues. As I mentioned before, facial expressions. So, obviously it's recording everything, not only your video, but your audio. So you have to be careful about your tone of voice, your mannerisms, your facial expressions, and things like that. Okay. So these are interviews that are recorded and conducted by a robot, which necessarily isn't a robot. It's all about AI. Okay. So as with anything else, even if it's AI or in person, um, we just have to avoid everything in the background, okay? Because we're talking about the actual camera now. So make sure that you know how to interview very well. Be very careful about your volume of your speech. Be very aware about your eye contact. That is really the key. Always be looking at the camera, okay? And of course, dress appropriately. We spoke about that before. And you need to make sure that your face is in the center of the screen. So basically, when you're setting up a virtual interview, you can see how you look in the camera, right? And that's important. Okay, text interview. So this is not correct, okay? And I'm going to step through this, but I just want to make sure that we talk about this a little bit. Okay, we will never do a text interview. Um, and I have no idea why these slides are here. But basically, with technology today, if you happen to receive a text from a potential recruiter or someone that would asking you to join them in a text interview, please do not accept it. This is one way that you can truly be hacked, and everything on your smartphone is downloaded, and your personal identity, and if you happen to have all your banking information or your social security, whatever is on your phone, is going to be now open market to anybody. All right. So this happens to be something that may have existed in the past. I have truly never heard of text interviews, but it seems to have existed. I would suggest please do not respond to a text interview. Okay, because the while the phone system is actually initiating the text message to you, it doesn't have the encryption technology to give you the protection like some of the other tools such as Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever application that you're using um, to to screen from potential hacking. Okay, if you happen to do a text interview, you are, give me one sec, so somebody said something in chat. One sec. They're popping up more often these days. Yes, and more than likely, Millicent, is that these are scammers that are setting you up for the potential text interview. So they know that many people are out there and they're desperate, and of course, everyone has a smartphone. So the ones that are not necessarily educated and understand about hacking are responding to these text interviews, and that's what they're doing. These hackers are going after the not necessarily uneducated, but technologically uneducated. They're going after the vulnerable people that are desperate for jobs. And what are they capturing? Everything in their phone system. Okay, so if you want to do the research, there's a new technology that's being utilized and it is very actually very shocking to me that this can exist, where they can send you a text message, and if you happen to open the text message, not click on a link, but if you happen to open a text message, then the hacker has access to your phone. And I know that Apple and a lot of the other companies are working very quickly on this issue, but it's just very sophisticated software, so you have to be careful about, give me one sec. Yes, exactly. So Nevin, absolutely. So more people are getting asked to attend interviews, even on LinkedIn, and so that's what Nevin is sharing with us. And they are basically um, losing all their personal information because they're actually, what they're doing is that it's not that they're necessarily breaching LinkedIn to steal their ID. They're breaching your phone system, or however you are, whatever methodology you're using, such as it could be your desktop, your laptop, or whatever. Okay, but the most important thing to understand is anytime you receive some kind of notification that someone wants to invite you to a potential interview, and they don't identify their company, they don't identify their name, they don't have identify their contact information, and you haven't validated that this is a legit company, please do not respond to that opportunity, because this is a worldwide problem right now, okay? And it's not just in the United States. A lot of countries in Europe are succumbing to this. And unfortunately, we don't know where it's coming from, but we can imagine. Um, it can be coming from India, it can be coming from China, it can be coming from North Korea, it can be coming from countries that truly want to create a lot of chaos in this civilized Western countries. Okay, so be very careful. And typically, I don't know why they're even suggesting these slides to exist. But when I do work on these workshops, I'll be basically saying beware of scams, and that's it. We're not going to entertain doing anything on text interviewing. Okay, so I'm just going to step through this real quick and get to the next one. Okay, because here they're saying thank you, the interview by mail, not text. Okay, so interview audition. So this is where you are actually invited to a location to actually do an interview, and this could be like you're doing you're in, give me one sec, am I way behind schedule? Okay, so it's 3:30, so I apologize, we're going to be a little late. Just to let you know, if you have a hard stop at 3:30, because it's obviously we've been here 90 minutes, you're more than welcome to drop off. I will continue, but you will still get full credit. Okay, so sorry for the massive delay here. But interview audition is obviously where you might be doing warehouse work, and so you're being asked to come in, and you might be paid or not paid to demonstrate that you can actually do the job. Okay, so that's typically what it is. Or it could be a call center environment. That happens to be a lot of things that are happening these days, where like telemarketing or something like that, they want you to come in just to do a 2-hour setup to make sure that you speak well and things like that, you can type and things like that, but chances are they're not going to pay you for that. Okay, so that's what we call an interview audition. In-person interview, we talked about this, okay? Typically, in person, it's conducted by hiring manager or supervisor. You could have a panel or a committee interview. You could also have what we call a group interview. Now, a group interview is where a lot of people are in the same room competing for one or several jobs. And why would they do that? Because they want to see how you socially interact with each other. And typically this is done by companies like Hard Rock, AT&T, and some of the telemarketing companies where they're hiring a lot of people. And they want to see what type of soft skills and what type of professional skills you have when you are in a setting being asked an interview question. Um, if somebody doesn't know how to answer, and perhaps they may be embarrassed. So in this setting, let's say that you are in a very large room with several people, and the interviewers are actually addressing the question to different people, and perhaps some people are absolutely clueless, and there are some snickers and some chuckles by other potential clients in the room, or potential employees. Those people are actually going to be identified and X'd out of the um, actual running for that interview. Okay, for the opportunity. So just be aware that's typically why they use group interviews, is to see how you interact with others. Okay, one sec. I'm just gonna look at the text. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Um, so panel interviews, this is where multiple departments might want to interview you. Okay, and that's why we're having that. And then of course the single in-person interview, the recruiter or the hiring manager. All right. Now, tips for face-to-face. All right, it's not 15 minutes. It's as early as you can, an hour or more, for all the reasons that we suggested. Allow at least 4 hours for the interview. It's possible it could even last longer than that. Now this says ask permission to set anything down. I'm not quite sure if that's a cultural issue. I think what it means is ask permission if you can put anything on the interview desk, but not setting anything down on the floor or whatever. Um, Please do not keep anything in your lap. I don't know why this slide identifies that. You must not keep anything in your lap. And certainly I would not suggest that you put anything on the floor. There should be other places where you can rest your portfolio or your purse or whatever. Um, but it's very rare that anybody forces you to put anything on the floor in an interview setting. Okay, but if you put anything in your lap, it might become difficult when you're having this interview, because if the item is very heavy, um, you may start to get uncomfortable, and so you basically have to get up and move whatever is on your lap to another location, and that's a distraction. Okay, so obviously you're going to bring your portfolio and obviously everything else that you need to potentially get that you know opportunity. Okay, so we spoke about body language, we spoke about direct eye contact, we spoke about actively listening, smiling, we spoke about not fidgeting, and these are potential questions that they might be asking you. But remember that when we're going to get ready for the potential interview, we're already going to be doing our research to find out exactly what type of interview questions that they would be asking us. Okay, so this slide is obviously going to get changed, because I would say that why do you want to work here? That's typically an interview question that could be one of three, and these are exactly the same. It's tell me about yourself. Why do you want to work here, and why should we hire you? All right, those three are exactly the same. So meaning that you can use the same answer for those three types of questions, because you're basically responding with your abilities, your and all the great things that you have as it relates to the job opportunity and the job description. Okay, so what can you do for us? What kind of person are you? I'm not even going to get into this discussion right now. Can I afford you? Yeah, I don't even know why that question is on the slide. Can I afford you? Um, I've never actually thought about this question, but I'm going to look it up. So I would suggest don't put any emphasis on this one. Can I afford you? I don't even know why that's actually in. That would more or less be a very high executive level type of question that they would be asking, and that. mm. Anyway, I kind of have a mental block in this one, so I'm just going to move forward. Okay, giving responses. Remember that we can use a STAR method to respond, especially if we're going to be telling a story. So the key important thing is you're going to talk about how you can meet the company expectations and how you can resolve their challenges and their issues. You'll never ever respond with a negative question or a negative answer. And if you are being asked a question, please never respond. If you're being asked a question about your previous employer or your employees or your co-workers or whatever has been happening in the past at different companies, please always remember we will never ever identify a negative situation during an interview. Everything must be positive. Everything must be no baggage, no barriers, and we never want to ever say anything negative about our previous employer or employees or co-workers, because that could be construed as that you're going to say something negative about the company that's presently interviewing you. Okay, so remember though that when you need to create a story to a scenario question, such as tell me about a time when, you're going to use a STAR method, which is a situation, task, action, result, to actually formulate the answer for that. Okay, so let's move forward and talk about types of interview questions. I'm going to go through this real quickly. I'm actually even going to bypass this. This is these are different types of questions. Okay, so experience verification, I'm not even going to spend any time on this because I believe that some of these are not even pertinent. Let me step through this and see where we're going with this. Okay, so experience verification question could be like, what projects have you worked on related to a specific skills? No, this is where they might ask you a question based on your resume. You said you have 5 years of experience doing whatever. What were some of the most valuable things that you learned? Okay, so this is a potential question that a one-way video interview, which is an automated interview technique, would ask you to verify that you have actually been honest in your representation on your resume about what you did in your previous job. Okay, so this definitely something to be aware of. All right, so, or how do you explain the employment gap listed in your resume? When we do our resumes, remember that the resume doesn't have to contain only paid employment. It can be an experience of unpaid employment. So we should never have any substantial gaps in our resume. When we have gaps in our resume employment history, that is a big red flag, more or less. So if we've been out of work for some time, you should be occupying your time not only with doing your job search, obviously, and preparing yourself, but you should be doing something else to show that you're actively involved in either improving your skill sets or doing volunteer service or community service. So while we are in the career transition, if we are in a career transition for more than 3 months and we have not successfully secured employment, then we need to close that gap, or we need to fill that gap. And I would suggest that while you're in career transition, that you identify that you are assisting others. Either perhaps you might even be creating your startup company. Okay, so that's one way to close that gap. Identify that you have started your own business and that obviously you weren't able to pay yourself because you're starting it up, so that took your time. Or another way to close the gap is that you're doing community service, helping out charities, possibly volunteering, helping out schools or churches or places of worship, or mentoring others, perhaps handicapped children, whatever. You have to show somehow that you're actively involved. And when we think about community service or volunteering, that's a very powerful statement to have in your resume as well. because employers like to see that. So we're not just sitting on a couch doing nothing, and we're not just doing job searching and trying to secure jobs, even though that is the priority. We're actually engaged in doing something to assist our social environment. Okay, so behavior situational questions could be like, give me an example of a time that you managed something. Okay, tell me about a time when you're under a lot of pressure. All right, what would you do if you faced a conflict? All right, so these are situation questions that you would basically be using the STAR technique to answer or formulate the answer. All right, so that's another opportunity there. Okay, now interpersonal skill questions. So these are questions that typically might be asked. Okay, and I would say that they are definitely more subject to being asked actually these days. So what kind of people do you like to work with? All right, so basically you'd like to work with everyone, but you're going to have to, give a story as well, or a situation where you got along with your coworkers. All right, or another question is, tell me why you'd be a good team player. Excuse me. So you obviously have to come up with a story why you were a good team player in your past job. Or tell me about a time when you had to work with a coworker that disliked or trusted. Remember, these are interpersonal skill questions, okay? So it basically it's all about your soft skills and your ability to get along with others. And this actually is becoming quite consistent or more prevalent today. All right. So it's all about telling a story when you give the answer. Okay. Now, I'm going to bypass this. This is a brain teaser question. I'm not even going to think about this. Consistency, leadership, or competency leadership questions. This is basically if you are interviewing for a manager or supervisor position. Um, Basically, it's all about, how would you handle a difficult situation? How would you handle an escalation from your employees? How would you handle an HR position and things like that? How do you make sure projects stay on schedule, right? Case questions. This is if, for instance, you might be an accountant or a CPA and you are being interviewed with a company, and obviously to prove that you are good, they might give you a case for you to analyze and to identify to them how you'd handle the situation. Or in the case where you are a nurse and you go for an interview, you could obviously be given a case, which is that you'd be escorted into a patient's room and you'd identify based on the situation how you'd handle the potential medical issues that you're faced with. Okay, so things like that. Okay, nonsense questions. I'm not even going to think about this here. This is like a lot of these are asked for sales and marketing. Sell me this glass of water, sell me this pencil, things like that. And basically other common interview questions. Tell me about yourself, right candidate for the job, and things like that. So we could just keep going on and on and on with these potential interview questions. Okay, um, where do you see yourself in 5 years? This is typically most of the time always asked. So what you're going to definitely answer this question, how you're going to answer this question is as it relates to the company. All right. Um, Sometimes when they ask you this question, you have to be careful because if you identify that you want to move into management, and the person who is interviewing you is very insecure and they happen to be your manager, they might feel that you're there to take their job. So just be very careful and be engaged whenever you're answering this type of question, who you're speaking to, and there are many different ways to answer this question. As far as if I were answering this question, I would basically identify that I would see myself being successful in the company within 5 years, that I would be doing everything possible to make sure that we are maintaining the bottom line, increasing revenue, reducing cost, increasing our customer base. I would possibly identify that my intent would be to get to know as much about the company as possible, probably given the opportunity to work in multiple departments. But I would just be very careful about suggesting that you want to move up into management, because while that might be a fast track for you and that is your intent, it could certainly might, depending if there's some insecurity, prevent you from getting that job opportunity. Okay, so we're going to move forward, and questions to ask the employees. Okay, now I'm going to look at this. Oops, give me one sec. When we when we are creating questions to ask the employer, please don't ask some questions where they're going to basically tell you, not tell you the honest truth. Okay, so when you ask this question, what is the typical leadership style here? All right, that could be a good question to ask, and they might identify that, this is a vertical channel, or this is a matrix management style, or something like that. But you really should be asking questions about the job opportunity and how you see your role, because that's what you want to do, is to find out exactly what you're going to be doing. How much time do you have to do it? What are you going to be gauged on? Will you what is a probationary period? What is a potential training and advancement opportunities and things like that? When you're asking questions like what is a typical leadership style here, that means that obviously if you're an executive, you're interested in a leadership style, but it really has no bearing on potentially has no bearing on the job opportunity in question. Okay, so who would I be reporting to? I would suggest that that's not even a question to be asking in the first interview or even the second interview, because it doesn't matter who you'll be reporting to. You're going to be there to do your job. Okay, now this question: is there any reason why you believe I would not be a good fit for this position? That is a brilliant question and should be asked of every interview, because before you leave that interview, you need to know if if you're positioned for the final running. In other words, have you done well during the interview? Do they believe that you're a strong candidate? Is there something that happened during the interview that might position them to feel that you don't have the skills and the abilities to be a competent future employee? So this question is brilliant. I would always suggest that we should ask it. Some of us don't want to, because we don't want to position ourselves where we might be receiving some kind of criticism. But you need to know when you leave that interview if you need to follow up in your interview thank you letter with good things or with some way to recover. All right. So this is actually um, a very good question. And then, of course, what is my best way to follow up with you about my candidacy? That's obviously a good question, because you need to understand if you're going to be sending them email or you're going to be going through their communication channel site, or however you interviewed with them before. Okay. Um, so I would never ask this question, what do you personally like about this organization? They're going to tell you that they love the organization. They're not going to tell you anything is wrong with the company. All right. What do you find most challenging about working here? They're not going to tell you anything is challenging. They're going to tell you it's an absolutely great environment to work with. What would you expect me to achieve in the next 6 months? Okay, so this is about your probation. And yes, this might be a good question to ask, but it would be tailored slightly different. What are the biggest challenges your organization is facing right now? They're not going to tell you that they have any challenges, because if you're very good, they want you to come and work for them. So they're not going to sway you away by telling you that there's a lot of terrible things happening in the company and we're going out of business soon. Okay, so closing the interview, obviously get their business card, ask for the contact information, ask about the next steps, close with a positive statement. um, if it is not the right job for you, tell the interviewer what would be the right job. I totally disagree with this. All right, do not ever burn your bridge at the interview. You will always make the interviewer believe that you are absolutely happy with the interview and you are looking forward to working with the company. If you should tell the interviewer that this is not the right job for you, they may have no intent of discussing what would be the right job for you. Okay? Companies are not here to give handouts to people that are desperate to get jobs or want to get back into the workforce. Basically, it's like take it or leave it, unless you are so good that you can work your way through the market. Now, if you're discussing with a potential recruiter about job opportunities, and you're having an informal interview with the recruiter about potential, you know, things that are on the plate, then yes, you can talk to them about that is not the right job, and then identify what would be the right job for you. But if you're interviewing with a company, this is not the statement to be asking, okay? So send a thank you email within 4 hours, not 24 or 48 hours. Express your gratitude and your interest, and of course, make sure you get their contact information and their first name and their last name and their email address, so you can follow up with everyone if it was especially a panel interview. And then, if you're going to do a thank you letter to a panel interview to, like, perhaps maybe 4 or 6 people, do not send the same thank you letter to everyone, because they may get together and compare notes, and then they would identify that you've done something very tacky by sending all of them the same thank you letter. Okay, so it has to be slightly different. Okay, because that thank you letter is going to address what happened during the interview, and if you have any challenges or concerns, right? So you'd identify how to follow up, and I would suggest that 3 days after the interview is when you should absolutely follow up with either an email or a telephone call to identify about the status of the opportunity. Okay, so any questions? I'm sorry that we went over 20 minutes. I still haven't been able to manage my time very well. But do we have any questions or concerns before we exit out of here? Everyone asleep? No? Everyone gone home? Okay, thank you, Jill. Thank you, Dexter. All right, so for those of you who may have come in and didn't come in or registered late and didn't receive any emails from me, um, remember to check your spam. Okay, thank you, Helen. Remember to check your spam folder and your inbox for the 3 emails. As I mentioned before, one will be a summary. Thanks again, Jill. Appreciate it. Have a nice afternoon. One will be the summary information PDF document of the presentation. It won't be a PowerPoint. It will be actually a PDF Microsoft Word document. And then the second one will be the survey. And it's not mandatory that you complete that survey. It's something that they ask me to push to everyone to identify, what you may have enjoyed or not enjoyed, or any suggestions for what we can do in the future. So as I mentioned before, it's not mandatory. Please don't think that you must complete it. And then, of course, the third one is the email about your interviewing. Okay. So for those of you who I have met before and have completed the surveys, I do want to mention to you that the response from the management team within the last 8 weeks has been phenomenal. So I appreciate everyone who has given me a good review, and that was really quite surprising. Like I mentioned, if some of you have already turned in your reviews and you have said nice things about the presentations, I truly, truly appreciate that. Okay. Yes, Dexter, you signed up. Oh, thank you, Melissa. All right, that's so sweet of you. Yeah. All right, I'm holding up my heart for you right now with my 2 hands. All right, so thank you so much. Yeah, Dexter, you signed up on 1/9. Okay, so 1/9/26. Yeah. So Dexter, you've already received 2 emails. The only thing that you're missing is the handout. So if you got it, then that's good. If you didn't, shoot me an email, and I'll go ahead and push it to you. So Melissa, I just want to let you know I sent you that confirmation of the workshop for your unemployment earlier, and I'll go ahead and push another one to you for this workshop that you just attended.
Yeah,
So
I just signed up for this workshop
for the earlier
today.
workshop.
Yeah.
If there's nothing else, thank you all for attending, and I will see you on the next one. Remember, you can attend the workshops as often as you want, and you don't have to be worried about whatever the requirements are. Um, just sign up for the workshop, okay? Sometimes they put emphasis on, well, you must be a manager, you must be